Hey guys, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture. Nick's here with me today, and we're talking about taking an in-depth look at the connection between celebrity and diet culture and why it's harmful, specifically in the context of some other podcasts that are being done and some of the content, especially in the advertisement space, and just like why that is harmful, how to have conversation around it that feels like productive, some homework that I need to do to reach out on said harm and more. So can't wait for you to give it a listen. Hey Nick.
Hey Dan, how's it going?
Good. You're recording for the first time from your guys' new apartment.
Hey, yeah, no, we moved to Old Town Alexandria like like a month ago at this point, but still very fresh news, so very exciting.
Yeah. So, for today's episode, I would like to take a more in depth look at the connection between celebrity and diet culture and why it's harmful. I know we had touched on this a little bit, I think, in our very first episode, but it's really been on my mind a lot lately, especially because there's more and more podcasts coming out from celebrities and just some of the things I want to talk about today. It's really been irritating me.
Let's do it.
Um, and so, like, I want to say, because this podcast isn't just about venting about problems, and I want to give a little disclaimer that I genuinely respect other people having their own opinions. I think it's important. And also, this is a really tough space because fat phobia isn't political. So I think it gets hard when we're talking about something that genuinely impacts people's health to be like, okay, yes, there's this side of it, and like holding that respect, and also talking about how it can be problematic and harmful. Um, but respect and dignity for another human life should be a bare minimum thing that we offer. And if you're adding someone for being fat, I challenge you to take a really deep look at why you think that's an appropriate weapon to use. It's probably because you were taught that and because our culture teaches it, but it is really very harmful to weaponize someone's body, which is literally like their earth suit or whatever you want to call it. Like it's the vessel we exist in, to gain whatever edge you're looking for. So, this is where my brain is going with the connection of how it becomes harmful when celebrities perpetuate diet culture. And I have a lot of empathy, actually. Well, I guess sympathy. I can't have empathy. Can you? I always get confused about that. If I can have empathy for someone I've never had their lived
Oh
experience. But
man.
um, anyway, that's a tangent we don't need to get into. But I feel for people who get put on a pedestal and like put on blast for being like stalked while they're at the beach or the grocery store in their very human body. And I would imagine that that pressure of having people constantly watching you underneath diet culture, and like Hollywood would probably make that pretty difficult. Um, and I'm certainly not saying anything about like anyone who asks for that fame or anyone is asking for that fame or anything like that. But I'm noticing that a lot of celebrities are advocating for social justice and they're using their powers and their privileges for good. So it's really falling flat for me how this issue of systemic oppression in relation to body sizes and diet culture is just being like wildly overlooked and further perpetuated. So, are we tracking? That was a lot.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay. So I'm going to share a couple of the examples that have recently like come to mind, and just feel free to chime in whenever you have thoughts about it, Nick. Um, so I was listening to a podcast recently that was interviewing Kim Kardashian West, and they were talking about how Kim comes under fire for showing herself at her like thinnest and best quote unquote self. And on this podcast episode, she was defended by the hosts for like her right to keep her Instagram curated the way that she wants it. And so like certainly that is your right with your social media platform to like use it and curate it how you want it. That part I'm certainly not arguing. And she does not owe it to anybody to do work that she does not want to do. Obviously, we don't know her personally, but just like from anything you get from her, it seems like that like fighting diet culture is not something we're going to get from KKW, and like whatever, she can live her life and no one has to follow her. None of that. So like I get it. I can rationalize this. The thing is that like whenever she has one of these situations of like, I bet most people could think of the image of that corset photograph that kind of went viral. It was on her Instagram, but it showed up in a lot of places, and I even had it brought up in individual sessions of eating disorder treatment that I was helping people with at that time. I can't remember exactly when this was that this happened, but you don't have to follow her in order to like see this content. And it's important for young people, like the more that we're constantly being exposed to this kind of stuff with social media being so prevalent, um, like I think it's really important to talk about why it's harmful, and to hear other celebrities just dismiss it. Like I wish we could have an open conversation. Like obviously I'm not in any position where I'm going to get invited on any of these podcasts to talk at this time with any of these people. But that's what I want to have a conversation, because the point isn't to be like, no, like she has this personal responsibility, right? Because like we can't put that on her. The thing that's just concerning is that there's so many privileges that really like dance around this issue for another woman like coming in her defense. And I again don't disagree with those points, but it is definitely like a dangerous issue. And I think like not the point of this isn't really to be like, oh my God, like she's a terrible person, blah, blah, blah. How could she? That's not where I'm coming from at all. It's more like, how do we curate these conversations amongst ourselves in a productive way? Because these images are going to influence us. Like, we know that at this point. Like, things we surround ourselves with and are constantly inundated with are going to influence us. And I think like she certainly has contributed to inclusivity with her Skims line, which does offer a variety of skin tone and sizes for shapewear and the other products that she offers. And I'll definitely never have an inside look at how much of the show Keeping Up with the Kardashians has been like created for TV versus just documenting their lives. But through watching that series, it really seems like many of the people in that family struggle immensely with having to look a certain way. And I remember this specific episode where Kim had been photographed and had a complete breakdown because of how her body looked, and saying that they had photoshopped it in like a negative way. And I think that that is a terrible thing for her to be like photographed. I have a real big issue with paparazzi and people taking pictures of someone without their permission and putting them on the internet. Like that's a whole nother issue. But to have your like day or your week destroyed by something like this, seems really sad and like not a reason to fight harder against biology and trying to curate this perfect body, but a reason to fight against like the bullshit that's happening in the first place and to like fight against having to care about needing to look perfect. And I think that piece is something that we can all really relate to because I've had this conversation a lot recently where like when there's a group of people at a restaurant, it's typically or somewhere where there's a long table and people are gathered and someone takes a photograph, and if you're on the like front end of that table where you're closest to the camera, because of how like angles work, your body is going to look um larger probably than it actually would if the person that was standing there views you. And I know that that's like it's like a joke amongst people of like, oh, who gets to be on the end of the table where they end up looking fatter in the photograph. And that's like something that's on people's mind. And it's like, who cares really at the end of the day? But we do, because we're taught to care. And when we see people, I'm not saying everyone has like a celebrity that they look up to, but it's hard not to when they are doing these other things that are positive. Like it's hard not to hold celebrities as role models. And then like we forget like they're also human. So just because they feel the need to do this does not mean that like that's this baseline expectation for society, but it gets really like intermingled or meshed or whatever it is, the word that I'm looking for there. Um, so yeah, it's just frustrating because there's like, I think we have this reaction to get like angry about it, which is where a lot of my like desire to talk about things on the podcast, it comes from a place of frustration because there's very clearly all these issues, and especially right now with COVID impacting people's mental health more than at least it's being documented more than I've ever been aware of in my lifetime, and seeing the prevalence of eating disorders rise and the wait lists, like just at the facility alone that I work at, it's hard not to be really frustrated by things like this because it's just adding this unnecessary layer. Like, because even if we removed all of this, the whole societal factor, like, I'm I don't think that would fully resolve eating disorders. And we know that like our culture is impacted so greatly by this. And it's painful even for the people involved. Um, so just like a lot that feels very much at stake and just frustrating because when people are talking about like her work as she's becoming a lawyer and like is helping to get people who were wrongly accused out of jail, and it's really or prison. It's really amazing actually, like some of the things that she's been able to contribute, and I'm like, yes, like this is amazing. And then we're having this conversation in the same like hour-long interview about how, oh yeah, like you're right to look the thinnest and best you possibly can. And it's just funny to me because there's just a miss of how that is an issue in that population of people, it seems. Do you have thoughts or do you want me to keep
I say keep
monologuing?
going. I just agree with everything. So keep going.
Okay. So there is another podcast that I have been listening to that has some actresses who were in a show that I really enjoy. And they're talking a lot about the harm that happens, especially to young people on a set with unsafe directors, and like the importance of empowering young women. And just this is an older show. And honestly, they're talking about some of the things that really just didn't land when there were really serious like issues being addressed in the show, but in a very like kind of gross and like lighthearted way almost. So the content of this podcast is really wonderful. And then we go to commercial break and they personally execute a supplement ad. And so I like point out that they're personally doing it because I've noticed recently that there's a lot of advertisements in podcasts that are done by whatever provider or company. But like this one was personally done. And the supplement ad went on for a while. And I was like, okay, whatever, vitamins, blah, blah, that's fine. Like, it's okay to take vitamins. And then there's this offering for pills of some sort to reduce bloating and to speed up metabolism. And I'm like, ugh, it just really like it was so disappointing that it got to that point because if you're reaching out to support young women who are and young people in general, this is not only about women, but they're very vulnerable and like especially for developing eating disorders, which is something I'm so protective over. And you're building up this trust with them, and then you suddenly drop reassurance that in addition to all these other issues, you also care very much about social justice and like you're also a beautiful human being according to like our standards in 2021, and you believe that they're doing this good thing, and then they're driving home the cultural importance of being thin enough. And that's just so harmful. And I know it's not being done on purpose. Like, I guarantee you that this is like, they're not like trying to make money off of doing this. They're like believing in this product is really where it seems to come from. And like there's a big difference between bloating and like having some kind of chronic or true digestive issue that needs intervention or medical attention, or needs like some kind of supplement to help with digestion. Like, sure, certainly there are cases for that, but just like every single person on the planet does not need to be taking a supplement because of bloating. Because I think we really use that word out of context because bloating is normal. Um, in a sense, and like your belly should expand throughout the day because we're going to wake up in our most dehydrated and empty selves and then like consume food and fluids throughout the day ideally, so your body is going to change throughout the day, um and especially when you're someone with thin privilege and you're like looking at yourself and you see your stomach be a little bit expanded throughout the day, and like we call this bloating, and it's like, well, actually this is just like normal human processes and digestion, and like hormones are going to play a role and your body size is going to play a role, and all these things, medication. So there's really no need at all to be promoting this to what is clearly being targeted as an audience of people who either love the show or just young women who may be watching it today, and they're really trying to help them understand some of the content a little bit differently. um and that is just like it. I don't know, like, is it miseducation around the importance of like prevention of eating disorders? I don't know where this comes from because also the bodies in this show certainly were a standard that is unattainable for the majority of human beings. Um,
You name dropped KKW. Can you name drop the show?
oh yeah, I guess so. I just I'm not worried about being sued. It's just like I just don't want to be like personally attacking people. But yeah, I
Well,
do
that's the
talk
thing
about
though,
the
is like
Kardashians a
it's not
lot.
it's not a personal attack on Kim Kardashian or uh the family, but like it is using an example of
Yeah.
something that they have done. Like I think it's fair to name drop because then we can all have like the exact instance and then
Yeah.
you know
Thanks for pointing that out. I
w-
wasn't even
w-
fully aware that I did that.
what is the
So this uh podcast is run by Sophia Bush, Hillary Burton, and Bethany Joy Lenz, who were actresses in the show One Tree Hill.
Gotcha. And the show is One Tree Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never watched that or listened to the podcast, but I wanted to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was I saying? Oh, just that their bodies being represented in that show. Um, it was very much made up of mostly people who were very thin and held lots of privilege. And I think that like makes it even harder because there seems to be a lot of also like ageism talked about in this podcast and like just really valuing bodies in a certain way and um yeah, it's just hard to first of all, it's hard on a personal level for me because I actually like really enjoy the content of this show. And then when things like that come up, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is falling so flat for me because like I am past this part of my life where I care about any of that as far as like buying into it. And I'm actively like working my 9 to 5 job to help people move past this and like do my podcast and like a lot of my life conversations. Like this is a very big work for me. And then when it seems like you can't get hardly any um, content that isn't directly about what we're talking about without having this stuff in there. And it's just like, it's kind of exhausting. And certainly, like, I don't have to listen to it, but it's like if this is that frustrating for me, I'm just thinking about myself like 5 or 6 years ago when I still very much was buying into disordered behaviors and still was clinging on to parts of my own eating disorder and just like how very very harmful this type of messaging is and yeah, just like wanting better for our futures or like our current the now.
Yeah, I'd like to push it closer to the now. Shout out Old Navy. They have really good inclusive commercials.
Yeah. What?
That I feel like that's the only one. I feel like it sticks out to me because that's like one of the only ones that I've seen in like
Mm,
so long.
yeah.
Um, but we were just talking about specifics, and I just because it's I don't know. I feel like there's not enough at all, or when people attempt it, I think a lot of times it can fall short or be too
Mhm.
focused on the product and stuff like that if they're still pushing like a food or something. So
Yeah, and I think that comes from a place of people who haven't genuinely done the work trying to look PC.
yes,
And
no,
that
I agree.
sucks. Like that
Yes,
really sucks because that's just not genuine. Anyone who you're trying to quote unquote help or support is going to see your bullshit immediately. Um,
yeah,
so uh okay. Another another one is that just like this has happened in multiple podcasts, but I've noticed it in the podcast Armchair Expert that Noom is promoted regularly. It's advertised in the commercial breaks. And we've talked about this before, but like Noom is 100% a diet. So,
we
like,
did talk about this, didn't we?
yep. And the company tries really hard to act like they aren't. But again, like my specific issue with this is that when you're someone with thin and economic privileges and white privilege, a lot of privilege, right? Talking to others about how Noom is helpful to you, that in and of itself is dangerous. Um, and then, like, someone who's trying to do the work of dismantling the harms of diet culture really just like doesn't need this shit being dropped left and right in the middle of a podcast. And that seems that like this podcast provides like what seems to be a pretty safe and like open and educational space. And so again, it's like that's when it's so frustrating that like we get to an ad break and it's like this thing is just dropped and it's just so um out there.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting one for me because, like, in this, I'm assuming this was another one that was read by the
Yeah, the host.
yeah, and I know, like, they probably don't produce their own show, so they probably don't place their own ads, they probably don't choose, and so it probably comes down to somebody walking in the room, the person that funds your show and does everything for you walks in the room and says, "Read this." Like, I'm assuming that's what it comes down to.
Well, so from what I understand about personal ads done on podcasts is that they're usually done by someone who's used the product and believes in the product because the way
Interesting.
the ads are talked about, I have trust in that.
Well,
Um,
is it a thing where, like, they ship them the product, they try it, and then like, is it, like, altruistically, like, Dax was like, I like Noom, this is on this list, let me
mhm.
rep Noom."
Well, so I don't know how it came about, but there are other things like he talks about Brook Lennons a lot and like says that
Yeah,
they use those and like those athletic greens, which is just like a vitamin that has superfoods, quote unquote, because I don't know how else to describe them that anyone would understand what I'm talking about. But like they talk about that a lot and how that's something. And then he like uses Bob's Red Mill oatmeal products and like so there's things that you very
gotcha.
clearly can tell that he utilizes in on a regular basis
Yeah,
that he talks about. And so like when this is something that's personally advertised, like anything that is used on that show, they've given personal like
yeah,
testament to their belief in the product. So this
okay.
doesn't seem like it would be anything different. Um, so that's where it's like, yikes. And he's not the only one I've in like his status of like celebrity that I've been hearing advertise Noom, and I'm just like, how did they infiltrate? How did they infiltrate? Because the thing that's also really interesting to me about this is like we talked about is I've seen some of the content that's in there and it's like not really like new information. So I'm actually quite surprised that someone of this status would never have been exposed to something that Noom does. So I don't even know what seems so appealing about it to someone cuz but maybe that's just because I think it's a bunch of nonsense anyway.
Gotcha. Was Noom the one that I pulled up on the podcast while we
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
okay.
And it you have to pay money for it's a subscription service and it's not cheap. I mean, for like someone who lives paycheck to paycheck or less, it's not
Yeah.
a cheap service. As are many of these products, because someone who has a higher status, of course, is going to utilize things that cost more money. Like that's just how the world works, and that's fine. It's not an attack. It's just like it seems like a lot of things are like trying to be made accessible and then this shit happens and this seems more harmful to me than an advertisement that pops up on a television show because this is being done by the person that runs the show, whereas
That's
like
funny.
actors and actresses in um television shows don't probably have anything to do with the network's advertisement schedule, but like this is very specifically done by this person. And that's
Yeah,
from any podcast I've ever listened to, unless it's they're just like putting an insert of someone else's own advertisement for their thing. It's something that person has used and they're raving about it. So unless I'm also being completely duped, it just seems like the from the inception of when I learned about podcast advertisements, it seems that people who run podcasts and are, have enough listeners to get ads, um, do things that they believe in.
yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that, honestly, and then I'd like to see if anybody has ever, like, throwing shots at them. I don't know what their like forums are like, but if anybody has ever been like, these ads are trash or something like that, like I would
Yeah.
be interested to see if people have ever pushed back against them.
Yeah. I thought about sending an email because you can directly like contact
Yeah.
any of these people. I haven't drafted it yet because I'm just not one, I'm like, if they don't respond, I'm gonna be pissed off. And I'm also just like, is it possible for this random person to influence a change like this? I don't know. And I think that's the piece of me that's like scared because I know what I'm talking about and I know it matters. And I'm like, but I don't have enough clout in society to impact someone of this status. Um, at least that's where I'm currently holding feelings around this whole thing and why I haven't done anything. Because like I've emailed other companies, like I've emailed Target and gotten a personal response about their lack of inclusivity and sizing and how I like witnessed something that additionally was a problem racially because of their sizing. And like I got a response, but I'm like, did they do anything about that? Probably not. Because I don't, well, they actually do have a plus size collection in Target now that I do not really like is like regular fashion. It's not like, but I can't speak to if it's appropriate or not because of my privilege. Like certainly I can't say that that was a fix, but I have noticed that. So maybe they were being serious when they said they were working on things.
I mean, that's good. I mean, the bottom, I do think that like while corporations most of the time just do like a lot of the times they like just want to be like politically correct
Yeah.
for the sake of being less attacked. But I do think they genuinely like, I think people have more like power than they give themselves credit for in terms of like, that if everybody stops buying their products, they can't sell to anybody. Like,
Yeah.
so I do think there is something there.
And I
Um,
guess that's part of oppression, right? Is like making people believe that they can't do anything about anything. And I'm just talking about I don't feel oppressed. I'm just talking about that in the light of just me feeling like I guess like economically not good enough or that I don't have enough of an influence anywhere to like make a difference, and that's like a feeling I'm experiencing for myself, and I'm sure there is some truth to it, but like yeah, I need to write these emails because like I think it could possibly at least flick a switch. Because I will say, like, I've heard, I have heard Sophia Bush um, say that she like said like diet culture and oppression. She like hinted at it, and then like but it wasn't in like a genuine like defense or like concern. But it's clearly at least a buzzword that she's aware of, whether or not she has done extensive like research or I don't know. I can't answer that. But I've heard it mentioned, but not in a way that I was like, oh, she's actually gonna like try and contribute to helping resolve this. And so sometimes I wonder like if it's even on someone's radar, because a lot of times in conversation of bringing a lot of this stuff up, no one has ever heard of health at every size, and no one has ever heard of what weight stigma is. And so, because they're not, if you don't follow a certain group of people or like look for that content, because the only reason I came across it is because of my profession. Like, if you're not looking for it, you might not necessarily come across it. I mean, obviously, like, fat phobia is a problem that like I wish we just understood was inherently an issue, but it's not, because of like the health quote unquote aspect that gets like thrown around with it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably part of it is just like people don't realize the harm that's happening. But I feel like it's already very difficult to try and heal relationship with food and body because our society is inherently fat phobic, and that it's important to be able to talk about why this is harmful. And like, I just want to say to anyone listening, if any of this has been triggering or disappointing to you, that you're not alone, and that we should never feel like we have to change something that we're following through with. That's really hard work because someone you look up to is very stuck in a pattern of like belief that doesn't serve you. And like, I really like personally resonate with this matter because for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like being conditioned as like a woman or just like circumstances of life, but like feeling very much like my opinion in general wasn't valid unless it was backed up by others, and like not believing in myself. And I worry about that for anyone fighting diet culture, just because it is not the norm. You really are like a minority of people, and the problem is like that isn't always just someone trying to like heal and have better mental health space and like not be upset that they're not a size 0 anymore. Like, I used to think like this is actually affecting people who exist in larger bodies, whose body is meant to be larger, and none of this bullshit that we hear about discipline or eating better, any of that is going to change that. And like their day-to-day life that is experiencing something different, and that is a systemic social injustice that we are treating the same way that we treat everything else. That's a problem. And so like this is a really big issue. It's just a matter of like, yeah, how do we tackle it without creating a space of like, oh, this person's a terrible person, because certainly no one I've mentioned in this podcast is a bad person or um any negative word. It just sucks because we are perpetuating harm if we're not unlearning things to do better. Um and it's hard to access that space when you're
Yeah, I
outside of
agree.
it.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like if you do have like thin privilege, um, like uh, I'm not saying anybody's more or less responsible, but I'm saying like if you do have the thin privilege, I feel like it's a like, and you believe in all this stuff, like be as vocal about it as you can, because y- like it's a safer space for you.
Yeah.
You actually have the floor, you have the safe space to talk about these things.
Yep.
That's where
Which
some
is
don't.
garbage, and it's reality. Um and I think we like also have to be really careful about how we talk about it, which is like something I, have learned so much over my time of podcasting over the past several years of just like, and will continue to learn all the time um, about, yeah, like we can't know everything that we haven't experienced. And it's really important that we don't try and pretend that we do. Um, so again, opening and offering, if anyone ever like hears anything that feels harmful in my work of this podcast, like I always want open and honest feedback about it, for
Same.
learning. So I know that like Jamil, hopefully I just pronounced her name correctly, um, does this work like with her podcast I Weigh, which is great because she's in this realm of celebrity, and so that's really lovely to see. And there certainly are like dietitians and therapists who are more well known that do this too, but it just would be really lovely if we could continue. So I gotta work on drafting my emails, and
You should do it.
I'll let everyone know once I've done that, and we'll see if anything comes of it. But I guess I'm always saying we gotta call to action and certainly conversation is important, but I know this has been on the back of my mind for a while now. I need to speak up just in case. So, I think that's more or less my rant slash thoughts. Do you have anything to add?
Um, maybe. I seen an Instagram post last night, and it was just like it was a Bleacher Report, which I would say is like the second biggest sports outlet for sports coverage. I'm not gonna. Maybe it's the third, but anyways, their Instagram account. I follow their Instagram account, and they posted a video. I sent it to you. It got taken down, hopefully for the correct reasons, but I sent it to you. It was just like a man in a 600-pound body, with inspirational music playing, and then it was like a TikTok. You've seen the format, and then like it cut to him afterwards, and he was in a 200-pound body, and the comment was like, no excuses. And I just want to push back against that mentality again, because absolutely nonsense. There are quite a lot of excuses, if you want to call them that, and just please don't stop making this that like this isn't that.
No.
I'm stumbling over my word here, but
Yeah, like, I think excuses, like, shoulds, kind of some of these words that we throw around when we're projecting something onto another human being, um, are really just, like, useless and inappropriate. Lazy is another one that I really think is complete garbage that gets used a lot. Yeah, that's really frustrating and not helpful and doesn't deserve, like, attention or
yeah,
none of it.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you told me what it was because I've been wondering when I saw a post unavailable what it was that you sent.
No, and I didn't have time to like filter through the comments.
Mm.
Sometimes I never know if I want to or not with stuff like that, because sometimes I just get like so riled up over stuff like that. But I'll see if I can like trace it back a little bit.
Yeah. That is deeply upsetting. Goodness. All right, well, you have your homework, I have my homework.
I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for the space for us to take a little break. It was mostly was good things happening, celebrations and moves and etc. that kept us from podcasting for a little bit. But it's nice to be back and very much appreciate your support and you listening. Would very much love to hear from anyone who has any questions, comments, concerns, any content you'd be interested in hearing us speak on further. So thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co-produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with Diet Culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.